Hey guys, and welcome to Top Channel 1-on-1, and here is what we're going to be doing today. It's a sandstorm that we have seen in a lot of movies like Mad Max, The Mummy, and a lot of other movies. I also added in a scout just to see how that could work, but here are some of my test renders. So I started out by creating a small test with a small smoke simulation to see if my computer can handle this. As you can see, it's a large effect, and I realized it could, and I could even do something even larger. I did a few other tests. Here I increased the smoke velocity. That's why you see that this dust is really coming in really fast compared to here. I'm going to show you some of the settings I use to give you an idea of what I'm doing here. I have this mesh here. Let's go to the modifiers and turn off most of them. So what I have is a mesh that is rotating like this, and that's how I get this effect here where the smoke is generated like that. You can see even the rotation within the smoke itself. It gives us that nice rolling effect. So this is a smoke object. You can see the setting are not that special. It's just a smoke object with an inflow, and I have the initial temperature set very low so that the smoke doesn't rise up quickly. And yeah, basically the source is mesh, and the type is also inflow, so that the smoke is continuously being added into the simulation. I also have an initial velocity set up with a source value of 1. So these are some of my final settings, but so here the initial velocity is a bit low. I think it was about 1, and here I increase it and also speed up the rotation of the emitter, giving us a really fast dust simulation. Then here is another one where I try to do something larger, something bigger, and I'm using the same setup, the same object. So this object is rotated moving forward. And if you look at the domain settings, there is nothing special here. The resolution is set to 75 so that we can have a faster render preview here. The time scale usually is set to 1, and I'm setting it to 0.1 because if you want to show large movement or large scale movement, objects that are very large usually look slower on camera, or they look slower on camera. So that's why you see that I'm changing the simulation speed to about 0.5 to infer proper scale. The initial velocity is set to 1 here, but you can set it to 2. Now, another thing you might want to look out for is the emission source. So you can see the smoke is being emitted far away from our mesh, but if you bring this down to something like 0.1, you should have the smoke being emitted closer to the mesh, just like that. If you want to see more detail, that's when you add a subdivisions and then a displacement. I'm just adding a noise in there to displace this. That's how we ended up with this. You can see at first this looks a bit smooth, and here it's more turbulent. If you want it to be more turbulent, you would have to go to the fluids settings or domain settings and add some vorticity. This will also give the smoke more turbulence. I also brought the buoyancy and heat a bit down because if these values are up, are high, the dust will rise up very fast, and since dust is a bit heavier than smoke, we want it to be more grounded, and so that it looks like dust instead of smoke, which rises a bit faster. So I'm setting this to 0.5, but you can even set it lower to get a more heavier dust effect. Another setting that you might want to watch out for is your shader. So if you set up your smoke, nothing special. I have the anisotropy set to about 4.5. That will give me a very dense looking dust simulation. So if I bring this down, you can see it looks more, light goes through it a little bit more, but if you don't want to push it too far because then it becomes too dark, I have it at around there, and this is the color I'm using here. The density, you want a really dense dust, so I have mine set to about 13, and that should give me the density, the thickness of the smoke I want. So that's how you achieve something like that. Now it was time to make this larger, and so that we have a really thick smoke effect or dust effect, just like this. So to do that, all I did, since I already had this setup with the animation and everything, I added some more subdivisions. I used an array to extend this on the other side and another array to extend it on this side. So this array just pushes this on the opposite side, just like that. And then I add, make sure the smoke simulation is below all of that, like that. I added an extra layer of displacement to this. And that's how I managed to get these results. So you can see the smoke is becoming quite dense and it's becoming really heavy and large. Right now it looks too smooth, and that's because in the domain settings, if you need it to be more chaotic and less smooth, you might want to turn on noise, and that will just add a little bit of noise into the simulation. And that gave me this chaotic render with a lot of smoke. And that gave me this chaotic render with a lot of noise. I thought it was too much, so I reduced that and got something like this. So for these results, the smoke strength was about 2, and the upraise was about 2 as well, and then the scale was 1 for these results. But as you can see, there's a lot of chaos. So that's why I reduced the results. I added in some extra rocks that are being thrown out. The way I did that, I just used a particle system. I added a particle system here. Basically the same setup I have here. I just have this moved a bit down. It also has the same rotation and movement, and it is also a smoke emitter, giving us another layer of smoke. But also has a particle system that throws these rocks towards the camera. I think it's a nice effect. So in another test, I started playing around to add a face like this. This face is just a mesh with a particle system. You can either use a particle system, or you can just use it directly as the mesh as your flow source. Any of the two can work. Just make sure you increase the surface distance to set it to 1, otherwise you start to see the particles being emitted out of the mesh, like you see here. So you can see them pop into existence and more. Just make sure that they are emitted a bit far from the surface, and also make sure that the source velocity, which is the velocity the particles are getting from the object's movement, is a bit higher, so that they are pushed out really fast, and that way you can get a more interesting animation like this. So if your skull is not visible, what you can do to help the shape come out is render the skull as well and give it a volume shading that is similar to the dust you have. You can see I just have the density a bit lower, so that is not too pronounced, but you can still see the shape, and as the smoke engulfs the skull, it disappears a bit, and that way it gives us a more creepy vibe and a ghost looking effect, and it disappears through the smoke. Now if you want to bring it back, you just animate it moving forward, and you will have a nice effect. Here is another test render. I think that's going to cover it. If you want to get the project file and test and just look at the different settings I have, you can go on my Patreon page or my Gumroad page. All the links are going to be in the description. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.